Welcome to episode 37, Stripe and the Collison Brothers, 10 Lessons. This is an outline of episode 37. Lesson number 1, dissatisfaction with the status quo.
John, as people watching at home tonight, probably your age, wondering and wanting to be an entrepreneur, but just not quite sure. What's your advice to people of your age who are thinking about jumping into what is a roller coaster ride?
When I think of the spirit of entrepreneurship and what really makes it stand out, the defining property for me is that dissatisfaction with the status quo and wanting to see some change in the world. And I mean, it's kind of like I said in the video, you know, at a certain point, Patrick and I just said, you know, screw it, how hard can it be?
Lesson number 2, no qualification needed. Just jump in.
And I think lots of us day to day have that nagging feeling of, you know, this is not quite right, this could work so much better. And I think being willing to, you know, despite being totally unqualified, despite, you know, this not being my gig, being willing to jump in and act on that is...
Lesson number 3, start business with brother.
Doesn't go well. I think when the sibling or whoever it might be, maybe your best friend, sort of is actually also really qualified for it, I think it's actually really good, because when you know somebody for sort of, you know, a decade or decades, you have sort of this advantage of you've gotten through sort of all the conflict resolution, in that, you know, John and I have been doing conflict resolution since we were 3 and 5. And
Lesson number 4, removing friction from internet payment.
The effects and the knock-on effects that the friction has that result in an overall impediment to business happening online. And so we think that for a long time it was so hard to start an online business that some people just didn't get over that hump, didn't make the effort. Similarly, we think that there is so much friction if you want to sell internationally that a lot of people just restrict themselves to domestic or regional markets. And so that's kind of what we mean when we talk about friction. We want to make it kind of so easy and so the kind of almost the default to be kind of getting up and running, selling online, selling internationally, that more of it happens as a result. And so we actually kind of talk about our mission as increasing the GDP of the internet. And
Lesson number 5, huge opportunities exist across national boundaries.
Alibaba didn't have a huge name and reputation here, which is kind of shocking, but Alipay is sort of the primary online payment mechanism in China. It's used for the vast majority of all online transactions. You know, more than 1 billion people in China, hundreds of millions of Alipay account holders. None of these people really able to transact outside of China. And so just like this vast sort of untapped dam of opportunity, hundreds of millions of people who you're sort of, you know, prohibiting from purchasing your product today. And so, yeah, exactly. We'd go to a business and we'd say, you know, wouldn't it be cool to sort of go and to solve this? And so frequently the reaction was, yeah, it's just not really a priority for us. It sounds great, but we don't have many sales in China. And it's like, don't think about that for a second. And you know, then we'd actually go and enable it on the site. And I mean, shockingly, their conversion rate from Chinese traffic would go from like hovering around 0 to like 50% or something, right?
Lesson number 6, it is easier to hire the best people if you have a big problem.
It's in some ways easier to build a really good team if you're solving a hard problem than an easy problem. And I think even more broadly, there's almost a way in which it's just easier, full stop, to solve a hard problem than an easy one. And so at the time, like when we were starting Stripe in early 2010, it was the era of sort of social games, and there was kind of a bunch of semi-ephemeral, or at least ostensibly kind of lightweight business models kind of percolating around the valley, right? And so we were pitching people on this like infrastructure. It was going to be hard. There were legal problems. There were going to be international expansion problems, all these things, right? And I think for sort of the best people, that's actually kind of more attractive, the idea of building something really durable than the proverbial next recipe app, right?
Lesson number 7, hire a lot of founders if you can.
About 20% of your company founded a company previously?
Yes. Actually, I think it was almost all of the first 10 people had started companies. I think, yes, every one of the first 10. And this kind of comes back to the kind of being known and hitting the ground running. We had sort of a sense for the like what we wanted to build on a 1 to 2 year time horizon, and the question was just how can we do that most expediently.
Lesson number 8, User acquisition, one customer at a time, as only small and nimble company can do.
User acquisition and getting a sense for how to do that, because the only examples you have to go off are large companies, and they have completely different user acquisition strategies to small companies. Large companies have big marketing departments that small companies can't afford. And so some of the best advice I got was from Paul Graham, one of the investors in Stripe, who talks a lot about unscalable strategies for user acquisition. Say, for example, you helping each user personally. Sure, that won't scale as you grow to a very large size, but when a startup is just starting out, it really helps you have an advantage as a small and nimble company.
Lesson number 9, fake customers are okay.
You pretty much can't succeed without doing this, because the other alternative, succeeding means like you have tons and tons of users, right? But you can't, it's very unlikely that you're going to make something and launch it and just suddenly have tons and tons of users, which means there's 2 alternatives. You will have to initially do things that don't scale as a way of getting users, or you won't get users and your company will die. So Stripe, for example, Stripe, they call this, in the beginning of Stripe, Stripe does like real-time payments. You just have this API and you say, I want to process a transaction, and bang, it works. Well, the way that used to work in the very beginning was what Stripe called the man behind the curtain strategy. They had a merchant account, right? And you would do this thing and they would like call somebody up and do the transaction behind.
Lesson number 10, learn from the history of other startups, like observing a magician trick.
I think it's actually really interesting that sort of in the technology and startup kind of culture in general, that actually we don't sort of think that much about history and what came before us. And there's this great line, I think, from Schopenhauer, though don't hold me to that, about sort of the value of sort of studying history, where it's sort of like watching sort of somebody performing a trick at the circus. And after you've seen it performed a couple of times, I mean, you start to get it, right? And so sort of, reality is in some sense the same tricks being performed again and again, and to sort of have observed it repeatedly is a huge advantage. You sort of start to understand the underlying pattern. And
Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and leave your comments and questions below. Wishing everyone peace and prosperity.